ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hope Experience podcast. This is our very first podcast that the Bill Prankett Evangelistic Association Arctic Hope Project has ever done before. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited that you're here. So thankful that you're tuning in, both via video recording and also audio recording. And folks, as I've been saying in these weekly videos that I've been doing on Facebook, that this whole premise, the premise of this podcast is a monthly thing, and we'll be bringing in guests to talk about their stories. The whole idea of the Hope podcast is to inspire hope, is to have champions come and tell their stories of how they've overcome different things. They'll be Christian, they'll be non-Christian. It's hope, and hope is something that I believe God can use in our lives to really inspire change. And change for so many lives is very necessary, and certainly hope and God have changed my life. And then traveling, ministering with Bill Prankett, we've seen hope really begin to build in the Arctic. Last year, traveled to 21 communities of 25 across the territory of Nunavut, where statistically it is the most hopeless place in Canada. The highest suicide rates, highest drug and alcohol abuse rates, so many people living in homes, things look quite dire. And I think it's in these types of environments where hope is very, very necessary. And folks, this is really just a platform. This is a place for us to tell those types of stories, to champion some of these people who've gone through some pretty terrible things, and to have their story of overcoming told in a social media platform for so many others to be inspired by. So welcome to the Hope Experience. This is number 1. This is January 2019. So excited for this year. Bill and I just came back from Texas, where we were with close to 1,400 other ministers and leaders from I don't know, across the world. I was sitting beside guys from England, from South Africa. There were Spanish representatives as well, African representatives, and European, everyone in between, all really believing God to do something in the areas that they come from. And I'm filled with hope. I'm filled with the idea that God can do something in Canada, that God can do something in Nunavut. And really, this is a place where we can talk about a few of those things. Bill Prankett was just in Alberta with Sammy and Charlie Robinson. And folks, if I can just brag on Bill for a minute. I mean, we're talking about a man who's 74 years old. My dad is 73. Bill is 74. Both of these guys in my life have a work rate that is rivaled. Bill, he's not young. I'm 28 years old. Both of these guys have quite a few years on me, but their work ethic is unmatched. My dad, he loves. They've got a hobby farm here in Ottawa, and they've got no problem at all making. My dad, he cuts his own wood. He has chickens that he feeds every morning, looks after, changes their the whatever they. I'm not even sure what they change. What Dad changes. I know he changes the flooring. Look, comment down below. I'm sure some of you guys know what that is. Any of you farmers out there, but quite embarrassed that I don't even know what my father does. But Bill travels across Canada, and was just in Calgary, where some notable miracles and healings took place. You can go to our BPEA Facebook page, and you see a picture of a little girl who was in a wheelchair before she came to the service, before God touched her body. And in the service at Southside Victory Church in Calgary, God completely touched this girl's life. And Bill, I guess, didn't know what was going on. He saw a little girl and heard a bit of a commotion as he was ministering. And there in the service, this little girl got up and started walking. And she'd had some kind of brain trauma. And anyway, we'll have Bill on the podcast to talk about exactly what happened there. But But phenomenal things that God is doing in Canada. Bill and I were just in Texas again, as I was saying before, and yeah, I mean he's quite an inspiration to me, and I hope many of you out there, of how God can use a life. How when we say yes to God, God comes and God just does amazing things in our lives. I've never really met a guy who's more excited than Bill, more excited about what's going on in the Arctic, more excited about what's going on in Canada. In the beginning of February, we've got our Russian delegate, Igor Bogomol. He's headed up to 3 different regions of Arctic Russia, where historically BPEA has gone and done some amazing things up there, like bringing humanitarian needs, but also bringing the gospel and touching many lives up there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic time. And I hope that every one of you guys have started off 2019 the same way we have, strong, excited for God to do something. And if there's anything we know about the Lord, is that He never leaves us. And I'm sure you've made the same commitments that we have to follow God. And if you haven't, well, now's a great time. Now's a great time to say to the Lord, hey, I appreciate what your son did so much, and I want to know who he is. You can take every moment, any moment like that, and really just choose to follow God. And I think that's the whole point, is walking with the Lord in relationship, in fellowship. And what fellowship means, the way that I think about fellowship is, it's friendship. It's doing life together. It's making intentional decisions to follow God and to walk with God. And I like to relate it back to some of the more, everyday relationships, friendships that we have. Like relationship I have with Becky, I'm very intentional with her, and we're intentional with each other. The time we spend together, communication with each other, thinking about each other. It's that type of friendship that I think God wants to have with us, and God, wants our lives to be amazing. And He can help us get there, which is the most amazing thing ever. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of start this podcast off by saying there is hope for us. There's hope for you. There's hope for me. There's hope for Nunavut. It was 2015. I was in a meeting in Edmonton, just outside of Edmonton, with Bill Prankard. I'd just come back from Nauyat in Nunavut, formerly known as Repulse Bay, and at that point in time, I'd been working with Bill, working under the Bill Prankard Evangelistic Association for about 8 months or so, and there in these meetings in Edmonton, we were all just kind of reflecting on the Lord, and there was some songs going on, there was worship going on, and I just come off, travels from the Arctic, and there I was in Edmonton. And I really kind of, the Lord showed me something, what He was going to do in Nunavut. And I saw this one arena in Iqaluit, Nunavut. I saw this arena completely packed, completely full with people. And there must have been 1,500 to 2,000 people in this arena. And they were all of them crying and holding each other, and just, it was this amazing display of healing, of things being worked out in their lives. And the Lord showed me was that He was going to begin to call people's hearts to Him. And there would come a day when arenas in the Arctic, hockey arenas, would be full of people crying out on His name, crying out to the Lord, praying, worshiping God. And the goodness of God had touched their lives in such a way that whatever it is that they were dealing with, whatever problems they were having, God's amazing love was touching their lives and removing all of those chains, all of those bondages, all of those weights, all of the things that they were addicted to. The love of God was completely moving on their hearts. And there in Edmonton, I saw this vision, this kind of movie in my mind, in my heart, and it was just amazing. And I honestly can still remember the sound of the level of crying across this arena. And specifically, I saw mothers and fathers holding each other and crying and saying sorry for things they'd done. I saw children also in this place of love and forgiveness and rekindling of friendship, of relationship, where previous things had gone on. And this was happening, thousands of people in this one community, this one arena. And I was there in Edmonton. I started crying, and I was deeply moved by what God was showing me. And the vision then went from there to this type of thing. It was almost like it was a light in the darkness. It was like a gold light. When you zoomed out of that arena, it was almost like Google Maps. You zoom right out, and you can kind of see the whole globe almost. And there in Iqaluit, this particular event was like gold light illuminating from Iqaluit. And I saw this same gold light, the same type of healing that God was doing there, spread out across all of the communities in Nunavut. And it was just these streams of gold light going and going and going to all of these different communities. And God showed me in this movie, in this vision that I was experiencing, that as a byproduct of God's love touching so many lives across the territory of Nunavut, that specifically suicide was going to decline. Specifically, families were going to be healed and brought back together. That alcoholism was going to drop. That physical domestic abuse was going to drop. And God said He was going to do this in Nunavut. So, what do you do with that? And I just said, God, if you can, if anyone can do it, I think you can. I think you can do this, God. And I believe that you'll do this, which is really what inspires us to go and travel the way we do. It was the reason why, we traveled to 21 communities last year, was going just to begin this type of work, to tell as many people in the territory of Nunavut as possible that God can change our lives, that God's love, that He's real, first of all, and secondly, that He can sort out some messes in our lives, that His love is capable of doing that. And so, that's the vision of the Arctic Hope Project, is to see healing take place, is to see lives changed by hope, by love, and really just to call on God in a way that I think is life-changing. So call it crazy if you want. I think that God can do it. In my personal story, I was abused when I was 16, and as heavy and terrible as that is, I called on God's name, and I started talking to people around me. I had good friends that I was talking to. I had mom and dad. I had elders. I started seeing a counselor, and I was also really going to church and finding my legs again there at the church, and calling on God's name, spending time with Him in moments similar moments that many of you, I'm sure, have had. And I was driving in my dad's van, and this van, Dad's van, God bless him. It's a work van. It's a white Chevy van, something that you might see like a U-Haul rental, type of vehicle, except this one has glass panel windows all around. It's not, a white kind of enclosed metal van. So this is Dad's van, and I was driving this thing. There was one particular time I was sitting outside of Starbucks, because where Mom and Dad lived, we never really had any internet growing up, and so I'd go to coffee shops to hop on their Wi-Fi, and there one night, sitting in this van, I guess the Starbucks employees got a little nervous. This big white van, kidnapper van looking type thing, was sitting outside their window as they were closing for the night. They called the cops, and the police officers showed up, boxed me in, 3 vehicles, 1 behind me and 2 in the side, all at the same time. And I'm freaking out because the lights are on, all this pressure's on me now, and I'm thinking like, what the heck did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. And the officer comes out, one hand on his gun, the other hand on his flashlight as he's going through, coming up to the front door, and I was just there applying for courses online, and anyway, officer said, "Son, what are you doing here?" And I noticed as the officer came up, all of the Starbucks employees left their they closed up shop, ran to their vehicles. Officer's on me now, and "Son, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, officer, I'm just here on the Wi-Fi. We don't have Wi-Fi at my parents' place, just in the farm. We don't have it, man." And he said, "Well, okay. You sure that's all you're doing?" And I said, "Absolutely. It's just myself, and I think my cousin was with me." So Dad's white van, and in that story, the officer let us go, and he kind of chuckled and said that I'd scared the Starbucks employees. And oddly enough, I knew every one of those employees. They all knew that, like, they used to make fun of Dad's white van because I got, to talking to a few of them during those days. And so I said, like, what did you guys call the cops on me for? You didn't have to call the cops. And a couple of them laughed and said they're sorry, and as it turned out, they gave me free drinks for about a month afterwards. They felt bad. So this white van, I specifically remember calling on God's name. After all of the drinking I'd been doing, after all the partying, with all of this mess I had inside of me, I called on God's name in that white van as I was driving to young adults service at the Dominion Outreach Center, the church I was going to at the time, calling on God's name and saying, "God, I know, man, that you can fix some things." In fact, Romans chapter 8, verse 28, if you got your Bibles, just pulling up on my phone here. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. This is something that my youth pastor taught us when we were teenagers. And verse 28 says, "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes." And I think what that means is when we call on God's name, when we love God, when we choose to follow God, I think a part of God's deal with us is that no matter what we've gone through, no matter how crazy it is, no matter how good or bad, God causes all of these things to come together for good. I was traveling with Bill one time. We were in church in, I think it was Alberta, might have been Calgary, and a lady heard my testimony that I'd gone through abuse and that God had healed me, and we were traveling the Arctic telling teenagers specifically that God, he helps with these things, he can heal these things, and this one lady came up to me and said, "Well, aren't you happy that God caused that man to abuse you? Aren't you happy that God made those things happen so that you could now have this story to travel across the..." I think that's a very silly thing to say. First of all, God doesn't cause bad things to happen so that he can have a good outcome. I think the likelihood, in fact, what I believe to be true, is that just stuff happens. Bad stuff happens, good stuff happens all the time. And when we follow God, especially when it's a bad thing that's happened in the past, God can cause that bad thing to have a good outcome, which is an amazing thing because we become overcomers. We become champions. God shows us that his love, his power really can work in amazing ways in our lives. And here in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says, "God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes." God has purposes for our lives. I think it was the first message, the first little video I did, weekly video this year, was on Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 11. And it says that God has plans for our lives. God has good plans for our lives. God has a hope and a future for us. And a hope and a future is a fantastic thing because it tells us that we have meaning, that God can use our lives for good. And I think it's a great thing for our lives to be used for good purposes because, well, the world needs help and people need help around us. And that's really what the whole point of this Hope Experience podcast is, to broaden that type of message that there is hope for our lives. And if you've got your Bibles with you, if you've got them handy, I'd like for you to turn to Philippians chapter 3 and verse 13. My wife and I are doing kind of a daily devotional, and this was one of the verses that this particular minister, this particular man, talked about. And in verse 13 it says, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended." And that's an old style of English, but we'll get to more of a modern translation of that. "But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before." And what a thing to say. I count not myself apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind. Forgetting those things which are behind. This particular letter was written in Greek a very long time ago, and the word behind. Sorry, we'll start with the word forgetting. It's a Greek word, and it's a compound word, epi and then lantho, and it means something that is finished, done with, or obsolete. So here the letter is saying, forgetting those things behind. So in other words, everything in the past, it's in the past. It's obsolete. There's nothing I can do about it. It portrays an idea that you and I should turn away from or forget. When used in a passive sense, it says here, it is something put aside, deliberately ignored, purposefully disregarded, and completely forgotten. I think it's a good thing, starting off in this month of January, for this new year of 2019. Granted, we're at the end of the month. But I think it's an important thing for us sometimes to forget the things that we've done wrong in the past. Forget the things that have happened before. That's not saying that you should forget, all of the trauma and stuff that we've ever gone through, all the bad experiences. I don't think that's what it's saying. Those things 100% you need to process, and you need help, and you need prayer, and you need counselors and different things like that to help you through. But there's no sense in beating ourselves up about things we've done in the past. The author goes on to say, stop thinking about it. Put it out of your mind. Put it behind you. Wipe it out. Erase it from your memory. Get it out of your system. Quit paying attention to it. Get your eyes off of it. Be oblivious to it and forget about it. And later in the verse, it says, forgetting those things which are behind. The word behind is another Greek word. Again, all of these passages are either Hebrew or Greek, or sometimes they're Aramaic. Not English is the point. So, it really is good for us when reading the Bible to understand what the original language was saying. Sometimes, it does get lost a little bit in translation. Or certainly that we get more of an understanding of what the author was trying to say when you look at it in the Greek or Hebrew or whatever original language, original text. The word behind is a Greek word opizo, which means relegated to the past, abandoned, or left behind. So, it's important for us to look at the future, look at what we are supposed to be doing, look at what we could be doing, to look at what the potential is for our lives. And I think in those scenarios, when looking at the past, it's important to keep the past in the past, to call on God's name, to say, what do you want for our future, and to start moving forward. The author of this one scripture goes on to say, this devotional, he says, an interpretive translation of this Philippians 3:13 could read, it's time for you to turn loose of the past. You need to put it aside, deliberately ignoring and purposefully disregarding what happened yesterday. The past is old and obsolete. So why fixate on it any longer? Stop turning around and to reflect on the past. You need to get it out of your system, put it behind you forever, and purposefully forget about it. Because that, in so many ways, sets up our future for this amazing thing that we don't have to carry any of our past mistakes. So, folks, really just an encouragement to you. The Hope Experience podcast is somewhere where you can come to get encouraged, to build yourself up, to continue in your belief, in your faith in God. I mean, the Bible is a fantastic thing, and it gives us all kinds of material for our lives to be forever changed. And number one, it's God's kind of letter to us. It's God's words to us, which is a great thing to have. But secondly, some things just need to be put in the past. Some things you need to stop beating yourself up about. Some things, we could do away with in our everyday behavior. And you can look at your life, and I'm sure you could find 100 different things. But the point is to put the past in the past. Go for God. Go for the most amazing future we can possibly have. And really, it should be fixated on helping those around us. Folks, I don't know what to say other than I love you, believing for you, and 2019 is going to be a fantastic year. You just wait. God really is going to take us on quite an adventure this year. Love you, and you'll see you next month.